The diplomatic station hung in space like a giant metal flower, its arms reaching out toward the stars. Ships from 47 different worlds had come here for the annual trade meeting. Some looked like crystals that could fly. Others were round and smooth like eggs. A few were so strange that humans still had trouble understanding how they worked. Jake Morrison straightened his blue uniform as he walked through the station's main corridor. As Earth's top diplomat, he had done this walk many times before. But today felt different. The alien creatures he passed seemed to watch him with something new in their eyes, something that made his skin crawl. Behind him walked Captain Lisa, Hayes, her hand never far from her weapon. She had been protecting Earth's diplomats for 10 years. She knew how to read danger, and right now every part of her was screaming that something bad was about to happen. They entered the great meeting hall, a massive room with a dome that showed the stars above. Hundreds of aliens sat in seats designed for their different bodies. The air smelled of strange chemicals and alien sweat. Jake took his place at the small table marked with Earth's symbol, a simple blue and green circle. High Chancellor Xerath rose from his seat at the center of the room. He was a Zephyrian, one of the crystal people who had been in space longer than humans had been using fire. His body caught the light and threw it back in rainbow colors. When he spoke, his voice sounded like breaking glass. "Friends and allies," Xerath began, his words echoing through the hall. "We gather here as we have for centuries to discuss trade and peace among our worlds." Jake had heard this speech before. It was always the same. The big, powerful aliens talked about working together while the smaller species like humanity sat quietly and listened. But today Xerath did not stop there. "However," the crystal being continued, "there are matters we must address. Questions about the future of our galaxy and who should lead it into the next age." A cold feeling grew in Jake's stomach. Around the room, other aliens began to sit up, straighter in their seats. The hive creatures called the collective started making their clicking sounds, which meant they were excited. The proud Valdorians, who looked like tall humans but with silver skin, began to whisper among themselves. "For too long," Xerath said, his voice growing louder, "we have allowed certain species to believe they belong at our table as equals. But wisdom comes with age, and some species are simply too young, too emotional, too short-lived to understand the complex needs of galactic civilization." Jake's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. He knew where this was going, but he could not believe it was really happening. "The humans," Xerath continued, and the word sounded like a curse in his crystal voice, "serve their purpose as workers and soldiers. They are useful for simple tasks, but they lack the wisdom for true leadership. Their emotions make them unstable. Their short lives mean they cannot think beyond their own brief existence." The hall erupted in sounds of agreement. Clicking, whistling, and growling filled the air as dozens of alien species voiced their support. Jake felt like he was drowning in a sea of noise and hatred. "Perhaps," Xerath said when the noise died down, "it is time to formally recognize their limitations, to place them where they truly belong in the natural order of things." Now the aliens were not just agreeing, they were laughing. The sound was horrible, like breaking metal and dying animals all mixed together. Jake stood up slowly. His heart was pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it. "High Chancellor," he said, his voice cutting through the alien laughter. "Earth requests the right to respond to these statements." Xerath turned his crystal head toward Jake, and for a moment the human diplomat thought he might be allowed to speak. Then the Zephyrian waved one of his sharp crystal hands like he was brushing away a fly. "The adults are speaking," Xerath said, and the laughter grew even louder. Jake felt something break inside him. Not just his pride or his feelings, but something deeper. Something that connected him to every human who had ever been told they were not good enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough. Behind him, Lisa's hand moved to her weapon. Her face was stone, but her eyes were fire. Around the room, other human diplomats and guards were standing up, their faces showing the same mix of anger and hurt. But Jake raised his hand, and his people stayed where they were. He looked around the room one more time, memorizing every face, every species that had laughed at humanity's dismissal. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. "Where are you going?" called out one of the Valdorians. "We are not finished discussing your people's new role." Jake stopped at the door and turned back. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but somehow everyone in the room heard every word. "You want to know humanity's role in this galaxy?" he said. "You'll find out soon enough." The human delegation left the hall in perfect silence. Behind them, the aliens continued their meeting, already moving on to other business. They had bigger things to worry about than the feelings of one small emotional species. But they should have paid attention to the look in Jake Morrison's eyes as he left. They should have noticed how straight Lisa Hayes held her shoulders as she followed him out. They should have remembered that humans had a saying about sleeping giants and what happened when you woke them up. Instead, they laughed and planned and made their deals, never thinking about the blue and green planet where 13 billion humans had just watched their species be dismissed like children. On Earth in the capital city, President Elena Rodriguez watched the broadcast from her office. Her advisors sat around her, their faces showing the same anger and hurt that Jake Morrison had felt. "Madam President," said General Ryan Blake, the head of Earth's military forces. "What are your orders?" Rodriguez was quiet for a long time. Outside her window, she could see protesters gathering in the streets. The news was spreading fast, and humanity was waking up to the truth about how the galaxy saw them. Finally, she turned to face her advisors. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held a promise of storms to come. "Recall all our diplomats," she said. "Shut down our trade missions. Bring our people home." "All of them?" asked Dr. Karen Wells, the head of Earth's Science Division. "All of them," Rodriguez confirmed. "And then we're going to show the galaxy exactly what this emotional, short-lived primitive species is capable of when someone makes the mistake of insulting us." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where humans were already beginning to gather, their voices rising in anger at the treatment their species had received. "They want to see what humans do when we're cornered?" she said quietly. "They're about to find out." In space, far above Earth, the first military ships were already changing course, heading home to receive new orders. The age of human diplomacy was ending. The age of human fire was about to begin. 6 months had passed since the great insult. The galaxy had mostly forgotten about the angry humans who walked out of the trade meeting. Business continued as usual. Ships carried goods between worlds. The powerful species made their deals and counted their profits. But something was wrong, and some aliens were starting to notice. Deep under the mountains of Colorado, Dr. Karen Wells walked through tunnels that had not existed a year ago. The rock walls were smooth and perfect, cut by machines that worked day and night. Emergency. Lights cast strange shadows as she made her way to the heart of what everyone called Project Prometheus. The main laboratory was huge, bigger than most buildings. Hundreds of humans worked at tables and computers, their faces lit by the glow of screens. They were building things, testing things, creating things the galaxy had never seen before. "How are we doing with the crystal frequency tests?" Karen asked Dr. Pete Johnson, who was standing over a table covered with pieces of broken crystal. "Better than we hoped," Pete said, holding up a small device that hummed with energy. "We found their weak point. Every Zephyrian has the same basic crystal structure. Hit them with this exact sound wave, and they just fall apart." Karen nodded and moved to the next table, where Alex Carter was working on something that looked like a computer but felt wrong somehow. The screen showed patterns that hurt to look at directly, like they were trying to crawl into your brain. "The hive mind virus is ready for testing," Alex said without looking up from his work. "The collective shares thoughts through quantum connections. We can't break those connections, but we can poison them, send the wrong kind of thought through their network, and it spreads like a disease." Across the laboratory, teams worked on weapons designed to kill each of the galaxy's major species, not just kill them, but do it in ways that would terrify their allies. Humans had spent 200 years watching, learning, and pretending to be harmless. Now all that knowledge was being turned into tools of war. General Ryan Blake entered the laboratory, his boots clicking on the metal floor. He was a big man with scars on his hands and a way of looking at people that made them want to stand straighter. 2. President wants an update, he said to Karen. How soon before we can begin operations? The weapons are ready, Karen replied. But Admiral Foster says the ships need another month. Blake nodded. She's building something special up there, something the galaxy won't see coming. High above Earth, Admiral Grace Foster floated in the command center of humanity's newest creation. The shipyard stretched for miles in every direction, filled with vessels that looked nothing like the ships humans had used before. These were not exploration ships or cargo haulers. They were weapons, pure and simple, built from materials taken from every alien species humanity had ever traded with, powered by fusion reactors that burned hotter than most stars. Armed with weapons that no alien defense had been designed to stop, the flagship hung in the center of the yard like a dark metal shark. Foster had named it Retribution, and just looking at it made her feel proud and angry at the same time. Admiral, called Captain Steve Parker as he floated over to her. The kinetic launchers are online. We can put a chunk of asteroid through anything in the galaxy at near light speed. Foster smiled. The aliens had energy shields that could stop laser beams and plasma bolts, but they had never faced simple rocks thrown fast enough to punch through planets. What about the stealth systems? She asked. Better than anything the aliens have, Parker replied. We can put a fleet anywhere in the galaxy without them knowing we're coming until it's too late. While the military prepared for war, Earth's diplomats were being very quiet. The few humans still stationed on alien worlds said little and watched everything. They attended meetings but offered no opinions. They smiled politely when aliens made jokes about primitive humans, but they were counting ships and studying defenses and sending coded messages back to Earth. Ambassador Jake Morrison sat in his small office on the trade station where the insult had happened. He had asked to stay here, claiming he wanted to keep working on peaceful solutions. The aliens thought this was funny. They let him stay because it amused them to have a human still trying to be diplomatic. They did not know that Jake's office was full of recording equipment that captured every conversation in the station. They did not know that his diplomatic bag carried sensors that could map every ship that docked. They did not know that every day, he sent detailed reports about alien military strength back to Earth. On the crystal world of Kethmore, the Zephyrians continued their mining operations. They pulled precious metals from the planet's core and shaped them with their natural crystal abilities. It was slow work, but they had been doing it for thousands of years. They did not notice the small human probe that had been watching their world for months. They did not see the way it studied their cities and counted their population. They certainly did not detect the harmonic resonance scanner that was mapping the exact frequency needed to make their entire civilization crumble. The collective's hive mind hummed with constant communication on their administrative world of Nexus Prime. Millions of drones shared thoughts and feelings and orders through quantum connections that spanned the galaxy. They felt safe in their unity, protected by the knowledge that they could not be surprised or divided. They did not know that Alex Carter had found a way to slip digital poison into their network. They did not realize that their greatest strength was about to become their greatest weakness. On Earth, President Rodriguez stood in the war room deep beneath the Capitol. Screens showed every human fleet, every secret weapon, every alien world that had been targeted for what she called the coming correction. How many worlds are we ready to hit simultaneously? She asked General Blake. 17, he replied. All military targets are major population centers. The ones that laughed the loudest at our dismissal. Rodriguez nodded. And our own defenses? The entire solar system is now a fortress, Admiral Foster said through a communication link from orbit. Any alien fleet that tries to attack Earth will find a very unpleasant surprise waiting for them. The president walked to a large window that looked out over the city. Even at night, she could see the lights of factories working around the clock. Humanity was preparing for war with an intensity that surprised even their own leaders. 6 months ago, they called us emotional and primitive, she said quietly. They said we were too short-lived to think beyond our own existence. She turned back to her advisors, and they saw something in her eyes that made them glad she was. On their side, they were wrong about our limitations, she continued. But they were right about one thing. We are emotional. We remember every insult. We remember every time someone told us we weren't good enough. Blake checked his watch. Admiral Foster reports the fleet is ready to deploy. Dr. Wells says all weapons are operational. We can begin operations at your command. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Outside, Earth continued its preparations. Millions of humans worked to build the tools that would reshape the galaxy. They did it not for conquest or glory, but for something simpler and more dangerous. They did it for respect. Send the message, she said finally. Let the galaxy know that humanity is withdrawing from all treaties and agreements. Tell them we're reconsidering our place in galactic civilization. And if they ask what that means, Blake asked. Rodriguez smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator that had been patient long enough. Tell them they'll find out soon. Across the galaxy, alien leaders received humanity's message with confusion and mild concern. Some laughed, remembering the emotional outburst 6 months ago. Others wondered if the humans were planning some kind of trade boycott. None of them understood that they had awakened something that had been sleeping for 200 years. None of them realized that the quiet, helpful humans had been learning how to kill them the entire time. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when you insulted a species that had conquered its own world through pure, stubborn determination. Earth was coming, and it was bringing fire. The crystal world of Kethavar was beautiful in the morning light. The Zephyrian cities sparkled like diamonds across the planet's surface. Millions of crystal beings went about their daily work, mining precious metals and growing new members of their species in the crystal gardens. They never saw the human ships coming. Commander Steve Parker stood on the bridge of his stealth cruiser as it dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Around him, 12 other ships appeared, like ghosts, their black hulls invisible to alien sensors. All ships report ready, said Lieutenant Amy Ross from her position at the communications console. Parker nodded and opened a channel to his fleet. This is for everyone who laughed at humanity 6 months ago. Begin harmonic bombardment. The ships turned their weapons toward the beautiful crystal world. But these were not normal weapons. They were speakers, massive ones that could send sound waves across space itself. Dr. Pete Johnson's frequency generator had been built into every ship. Now they began to sing, sending the exact harmonic note that would make Zephyrian crystal structures fall apart. On Kethvar, the Zephyrians were going about their morning when their world began to shake. At first, they thought it was an earthquake. Then the buildings started to crack. The crystal beings watched in horror as their cities began to crumble. The harmonic waves hit the exact frequency that their bodies were made of. Ancient spires that had stood for thousands of years collapsed in minutes. The Zephyrians themselves began to crack and shatter like glass hitting concrete. Within 3 hours, Kethavar was silent. The human fleet departed as quietly as it had arrived, leaving behind only crystal dust where a civilization had once lived. News of Kethavar's destruction spread across the galaxy like wildfire. At first, many aliens thought it was some kind of natural disaster. Crystal worlds sometimes had harmonic earthquakes that could damage cities. But then Nexus Prime went dark. Alex Carter sat in his computer lab on Earth, watching code scroll across his screen. For months, he had been slipping tiny programs into the collective's quantum network. The hive-minded aliens shared thoughts so freely that they never checked what they were sharing. Now those tiny programs activated all at once. On Nexus Prime, the collective's capital world, millions of drones were connected through quantum links that let them share thoughts instantly. The queen minds that controlled them floated in biotanks, their massive brains processing information from across the galaxy. The virus Alex had created was simple, but deadly. It was a thought that ate other thoughts, a piece of mental poison that spread through the network like fire through dry grass. The first drone to be infected screamed and fell down. The scream traveled through the quantum network to every other drone on the planet. They all screamed and fell down. The scream reached the Queen Minds, and they began to scream too. Within minutes, the entire planet was filled with the sound of millions of beings losing their minds at once. The quantum network that had been the collective's greatest strength became the weapon that destroyed them. Captain Nicole Brooks watched the reports coming in from her intelligence ship hidden in the outer system. The collective's ships were drifting powerless as their crews went insane. Their space stations had gone silent. An entire species was tearing itself apart from the inside. She smiled grimly and sent a coded message back to Earth. Target 2 eliminated, moving to next objective. The galaxy was starting to panic. 2 major species destroyed in a single day. Both attacks had been impossible by known science. The aliens began to realize that the quiet humans might be more dangerous than anyone had imagined. High Chancellor Zerath called an emergency meeting of the Galactic Council. Representatives from 45 remaining species gathered on the neutral station where humanity had been insulted 6 months before. "We face a crisis unlike any in galactic history," Zerath announced, his crystal voice filled with cracks of stress. "The humans have somehow developed weapons that can destroy entire worlds." "Impossible," said Lord Commander Vex of the Valdorians. "Human technology is centuries behind ours. They lack the sophistication for such weapons." "Then explain Kethvar," snapped Chancellor Zerath. "Explain Nexus Prime." The council chamber fell silent. None of them could explain how a primitive species had managed to destroy 2 of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations in a single day. "Perhaps," suggested Ambassador Thek of the Trilaxians, "we should attempt communication, find out what the humans want." "We know what they want," said a new voice from the chamber's entrance. Every alien head turned to see Ambassador Jake Morrison walking into the room, but he was not wearing his blue diplomatic uniform anymore. Instead, he wore the black and silver uniform of something called the Terran Defense Force. "You," whispered Zerath, his crystal body pulsing with fear and anger. Jake walked calmly to the center of the chamber and looked around at all the aliens who had laughed at humanity's dismissal. "You wanted to know humanity's place in the galaxy," he said quietly. "We're here to show you." Behind him, the chamber doors sealed shut. The aliens found that their communication systems had been blocked. They were trapped with the human they had dismissed as emotional and primitive. "This is impossible," Lord Commander Vex said, his silver skin turning pale. "Our security systems are the best in the galaxy." "You're right," Jake replied. "They are the best in the galaxy, but humans built them." The aliens looked around in growing panic as they realized the truth. For 200 years, humans had been the ones maintaining their computers, building their ships, designing their security systems. They had trusted the primitive species with everything. "Every system you rely on has a back door we can open," Jake continued. "Every weapon you built has a weakness we designed. Every ship in your fleets can be shut down with a signal from Earth." As if to prove his point, the lights in the chamber went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, but the message was clear. "Humans controlled everything. What do you want?" "What do you?" Zerath asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jake smiled, but it was not a kind smile. 6 months ago, you said humans were too emotional and short-lived for galactic leadership. You said we should know our place. He activated a holographic display that showed images from across the galaxy. Human fleets moving between star systems, alien worlds going dark one by one, species that had laughed at humanity now begging for mercy. "We know our place now," Jake said. "Right here, at the top where we should have been all along." The display showed more images. The Trilaxian gas processing plants had been infected with a biological agent that made their atmosphere poisonous. The machine species called the Constructors were dismantling themselves after human hackers corrupted their programming. One by one, every species that had dismissed humanity was being systematically destroyed. "Stop this madness," Lord Commander Vex demanded. "You're committing genocide across the galaxy." "We're correcting a mistake," Jake replied calmly. "For 2 centuries we played by your rules. We were polite and diplomatic and helpful. And what did we get? Laughter, dismissal, the suggestion that we should be grateful for whatever scraps you threw us." He walked closer to Zerath, and the crystal being took an involuntary step backward. You wanted emotional humans? Jake continued. Well, here's an emotion for you. We're angry. We're very, very angry, and we have very, very long memories. Outside the station, human ships began to appear. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. The sleek black vessels surrounded the diplomatic station like sharks circling prey. The galaxy is changing, Jake announced to the terrified aliens. The age of human diplomacy is over. The age of human dominance has begun. Admiral Foster's voice came over the communication system. All alien vessels in this system are ordered to surrender immediately. Any ship that attempts to flee will be destroyed. Through the chamber's windows, the aliens could see their own fleets powering down their weapons and raising white flags of surrender. Their crews were abandoning ship rather than fight the humans they had once laughed at. This is your new reality, Jake said as he walked toward the exit. Humanity is no longer asking for respect, we're taking it. He paused at the door and looked back at the assembled representatives of species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. Oh, and Chancellor Zerath, he said with a cold smile. The adults are speaking now. The chamber doors opened, and Jake, Morrison walked out, leaving behind a room full of aliens who were finally beginning to understand what they had awakened when they insulted humanity. In space around them, the human fleet waited patiently for orders. Earth had brought fire too. The galaxy and the burning had only just begun. 1 year had passed since humanity left the Galactic Council. What had once been an orderly galaxy of 47 species working together was now a collection of frightened worlds hiding behind whatever defenses they could build. President Elena Rodriguez stood in her new office aboard Orbital Command Station 1, high above Earth. Through the massive windows, she could see the blue and green planet that had become the center of galactic power. Ships from dozens of worlds came and went, but now they came asking for permission instead of giving orders. The gardener species is requesting a meeting, said General Ryan Blake as he entered her office. They want to discuss protection agreements. Rodriguez nodded. The gardeners had been smart. When the galaxy fell apart, they immediately surrendered to humanity and asked to become what they called friends instead of enemies. Their peaceful nature and the fact that they had never laughed at humanity's dismissal had saved them. Schedule it for tomorrow, she said. What about the others? The Trilaxians are still trying to fix their atmospheric processors, Blake reported. Half their worlds are uninhabitable now. The surviving constructors have built themselves into a single city and refuse to come out. The collective's remaining drones just wander around in circles without their queen minds to guide them. Rodriguez walked to her desk, where reports from across the galaxy waited for her attention. 17 species had been completely destroyed in the first wave of human attacks. 20 others had surrendered immediately. The remaining 8 were still trying to fight, but their resistance was falling apart day by day. Any word from the Zephyrian resistance? She asked. Blake smiled grimly. War Crystal Zenth is still making speeches about destroying the human plague, but he's down to 3 ships and maybe 1,000 followers. Admiral Foster thinks she can end it whenever you give the order. Not yet, Rodriguez said. Let him keep talking. The galaxy needs to see what happens to species that refuse to accept the new order. Across the galaxy, on a dying crystal world called Zenthkar, the last major Zephyrian leader floated in his command chamber. War Crystal Zenth had once commanded fleets that could destroy planets. Now he had 3 broken ships and followers, who were slowly losing hope. The humans cannot have won, he said to his few remaining advisors. We are the children of stars. We have ruled space for 10,000 years. My lord, said one of his captains, her crystal body cracked with stress. Perhaps we should consider surrender. The gardeners who joined the humans are thriving. Their worlds are more prosperous than ever. Zenth turned on her with fury that made his crystal body glow red-hot. Surrender? To creatures that lived in caves when our civilization was already ancient? Never. But even as he spoke, he could see human ships on his sensors. They had found his last hiding place, and they were coming. Admiral Grace Foster stood on the bridge of the Retribution as her fleet surrounded the crystal world. She had been hunting Zenth for months, letting him run just far enough to think he might escape before closing the trap again. "Admiral," reported Captain Steve Parker from his ship. "The Zephyrian fleet is powering up weapons. 3 ships against Heart 200. "Brave but stupid," Foster said. "Give them one chance to surrender, then end this." The communication came through clearly. "War Crystal Zenth, this is Admiral Foster of the Terran Defense Force. Surrender now, and your people will be relocated to a safe world. Continue fighting and you will all die." Zenth's response was exactly what Foster expected. "Death before dishonor, human scum." "Your choice," Foster said calmly. "All ships, fire at will." The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. The Zephyrian ships fought with desperate courage, but courage could not stop kinetic rounds traveling at near light speed. One by one, the crystal ships cracked apart like eggs. War Crystal Zenth's flagship was the last to die. As his ship broke apart around him, he sent a final message across the galaxy. "Remember us," he said. "Remember that we fought against the human darkness until the end." The message was heard on every world, by every species. But instead of inspiring rebellion, it had the opposite effect. The galaxy's remaining leaders looked at Zenth's fate and decided that cooperation with humanity might be the wiser choice. On Earth, President Rodriguez received the news of Zenth's death while meeting with representatives from 12 different species. They had come to discuss what humans were calling the new galactic order. "The Zephyrian resistance is finished," she announced to the assembled aliens. "War Crystal Zenth chose death over acceptance of human leadership. That choice is no longer available to the rest of you." The alien representatives sat quietly in their chairs, each one thinking about the species that no longer existed because they had opposed humanity. Ambassador Krill of the Gardeners spoke for all of them. "What do you require of us, President Rodriguez?" "Simple," she replied. "Acknowledge human authority. Contribute to galactic security. Treat human citizens with respect. In return, you keep your worlds, your cultures, and your lives." It was not really a negotiation. It was humanity explaining how things would work from now on. 3 months later, Jake Morrison stood in the same chamber where humanity had been insulted 18 months before. But everything was different now. The chamber had been rebuilt according to human designs. The seats were arranged so that everyone could see the central podium where human leaders spoke. Most importantly, the aliens in those seats were no longer the proud rulers of galactic civilization. They were representatives of client species in the Terran hegemony, and they knew it. The former Galactic Council claimed that humans were too emotional for leadership, Jake said as he looked out at the assembled aliens. "They said we were too short-lived to understand complex galactic politics." Behind him stood the architects of humanity's rise to power. Admiral Foster, who had turned human fleets into the galaxy's dominant military force. General Blake, who had planned the destruction of humanity's enemies. Dr. Karen Wells, whose weapons had made that destruction possible. "They were wrong about our limitations," Jake continued, "but they were right about our emotions. We do remember everything, every slight, every dismissal, every time someone told us to know our place." He walked closer to where High Chancellor Xerath sat in the front row. The once proud Zephyrian leader was now just another alien, hoping to keep his species alive under human rule. "You especially, Xerath," Jake said quietly. "You started this when you called us primitive in front of the entire galaxy. You turned what could have been a peaceful transition into a war that destroyed half the known species." Xerath's crystal body was dim now, no longer pulsing with the confident light it had once shown. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I see that now." "Yes, you were wrong," Jake agreed. "And now everyone knows it." He returned to the podium and activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Earth sat at the center, surrounded by the green dots of allied worlds and the red dots of worlds under direct human control. "This is your new reality," he announced. 23 species have joined the Terran hegemony as partners. 12 others exist under human protection. The rest... He paused, letting the silence speak for itself. "Some of you will ask if this is justice or revenge," Jake continued. The answer is both. You created a galaxy where might made right, where the strong dominated the weak. We simply proved that humans are stronger than you thought. Ambassador Krill of the Gardeners raised a tentative hand. What happens now, Ambassador Morrison? Jake smiled, and for the first time in months it was not a cold smile. Now we build something better. A galaxy where species are judged by their actions, not their age or technology. Where respect is earned, not assumed. He looked around the chamber one more time, seeing the faces of aliens who had once laughed at humanity's dismissal. Welcome to the age of human leadership, he said. We promise to do better than you did. Outside the station, human ships patrolled the space lanes that had once belonged to alien empires. On distant worlds, human administrators worked with local leaders to rebuild civilizations that had been damaged in the war. In research facilities across the galaxy, human scientists worked alongside alien researchers to develop new technologies that would benefit everyone. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson about underestimating others. Humanity had taught it with fire and steel, with weapons that turned strength into weakness and unity into chaos. But now, as President Rodriguez looked out at the stars from her office above Earth, she allowed herself to hope that the lesson would stick. The galaxy had dismissed humanity as primitive and emotional. They had been right about the emotional part. Humans did remember every slight, every insult, every moment of disrespect. But they also remembered acts of kindness, moments of cooperation, and species that chose friendship over domination. The age of human fire was ending. The age of human wisdom was about to begin. And this time, when someone asked about humanity's place in the galaxy, the answer would be simple. Right here at the top, where they intended to stay.